Eleanor Whitmore pressed her 3-year-old daughter against her chest and walked barefoot into the January storm. Behind her, her husband of 12 years stood at the window sipping bourbon, watching her stumble down the icy driveway. His mother waved goodbye with her diamond-covered fingers. They laughed. They actually laughed. But Marcus Ashford made one fatal mistake that night. He forgot to ask his wife one simple question. Why had she never once asked him for money? The answer would destroy everything he had ever built. If this story moves you, subscribe to my channel and follow Eleanor's journey to the very end. Comment your city below so I can see how far her story travels. Eleanor Whitmore had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her head. Not the leaving. She had never imagined the leaving. What she had rehearsed was the staying, the smiling, the pretending, the swallowing of every insult, every cold shoulder, every night. Marcus came home smelling like another woman's perfume and told her she was imagining things. But standing in the doorway of the mansion she had polished with her own hands for 12 years, holding her 3-year-old daughter Sophie wrapped in nothing but a thin cotton blanket. Eleanor realized she had never prepared for this. "You have 10 minutes." Patricia Ashford's voice cut through the foyer like a blade. The older woman sat in her high-backed chair, tea in hand, watching Eleanor the way someone watches a stain being scrubbed from expensive fabric. "Take what you came with. Leave what belongs to this family." "My daughter's coat." Eleanor's voice cracked. She hated how small she sounded. "Patricia, please. It's 20 degrees outside. Just let me get her coat." "The coat was purchased with Ashford money, dear." Patricia sipped her tea. "It stays. She's 3 years old. And she's half Ashford. The half that matters will be staying here." Eleanor's blood ran cold. She looked at Marcus. He stood by the fireplace scrolling through his phone, not even glancing up. 12 years. She had given this man 12 years of her life. She had dropped out of Columbia Law to support his startup. She had worked double shifts at her father's old diner, the one she told him she inherited from a distant aunt to pay for his first office space. She had nursed his mother through 2 surgeries, held his hand through every failure, celebrated every success as if it were her own. And now he couldn't even look at her. "Marcus." She stepped toward him. Sophie whimpered against her shoulder. "Marcus, look at me." He sighed. He actually sighed like she was being dramatic, like she was inconveniencing him. "What do you want me to say, Eleanor?" He finally looked up. His handsome face, the face she had loved since she was 22 years old, held nothing. No guilt, no shame, not even anger. Just emptiness. "The lawyers say the prenup is airtight. You get what you came in with. A suitcase and that old Honda that doesn't run anymore. Be grateful I'm not charging you for the 12 years of room and board." "Room and board?" Eleanor heard her own voice rise. "I was your wife. I raised our daughter. I managed this household. I introduced you to James Whitmore, the investor who saved your company in 2019. You'd have nothing without me." "James Whitmore." Marcus laughed. It was an ugly sound. "Your second cousin twice removed, or whatever you claimed he was. I closed that deal myself, Eleanor. You just happened to be standing there looking presentable for once." Patricia set her teacup down with a sharp clink. "Megan closes deals now, dear. You should see her at the investor dinners. Sophisticated, articulate. She understands the business world." Megan. The 26-year-old marketing director Marcus had been mentoring for the past 8 months. Eleanor had found the texts 3 weeks ago, the photos, the hotel receipts hidden in the company credit card statements. When she confronted Marcus, he didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He simply said, "I've outgrown you, Eleanor. It happens. Be an adult about it." Be an adult about it. She had spent 3 sleepless nights after that conversation. Not crying, she was past crying. She spent those nights in the basement office Marcus didn't know she had, surrounded by law textbooks and case files, reviewing every document she had ever signed during their marriage. What she found made her hands shake. But she couldn't think about that now. Now she had to focus on Sophie, on getting her daughter out of this house safely. I want shared custody. Eleanor straightened her spine. I'm taking Sophie. Absolutely not. Patricia stood up, her silk robe swishing around her ankles. That child is an Ashford heir. She belongs here where she can be raised properly, not dragged around to whatever roach-infested apartment you end up in. She's my daughter. She's our legacy. Marcus pocketed his phone and finally walked toward her. He stopped 3 feet away. Too close. Not close enough. The custody agreement is already drafted. Sole physical custody to me. Supervised visitation for you twice a month. If you fight it, we'll bring up your history. Eleanor felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. What history? Your father's history. The bankruptcy. The gambling debts. The fact that he died penniless in a nursing home you couldn't afford to pay for. Marcus tilted his head, studying her like she was a problem to be solved. Not exactly the stable background a family court likes to see. And then there's the matter of your employment history. A waitress, Eleanor. You're a 34-year-old waitress with no degree, no savings, and no prospects. What judge would give a child to you? The lies. The lies upon lies upon lies. Eleanor had told him her father was a failed small business owner who died poor. She had told him she dropped out of community college to work. She had told him she had nothing and no one. She had told him exactly what he wanted to hear, that she was no threat, no competition, no one who could ever overshadow him. And he had believed every word. Because Marcus Ashford never looked too closely at anything that didn't directly benefit him. The guards will escort you out in 5 minutes. Patricia was at the door now, holding it open. The January wind howled through the gap, carrying snowflakes into the marble foyer. Leave the child. No. Eleanor clutched Sophie tighter. Her daughter was awake now, blue eyes wide with confusion, tiny fingers gripping Eleanor's sweater. I'm not leaving without my daughter. Then we call the police. Marcus shrugged. Your choice. They stared at each other. 12 years of marriage compressed into this single frozen moment. Eleanor searched his face for any trace of the man she had loved, the nervous entrepreneur who couldn't afford lunch, who had looked at her across the diner counter and said, "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." That man was gone. Maybe he had never existed. Mommy. Sophie's small voice broke the silence. Mommy, I'm cold. Eleanor made her decision. She walked to the coat closet. Patricia moved to stop her, but Eleanor was faster. She grabbed her old denim jacket, the one she'd been wearing the night she met Marcus, and wrapped it around Sophie as best she could. It was thin. It was worn. It was nothing against the January cold. But it was hers. You'll regret this, Eleanor. Marcus called after her as she walked toward the open door. When you're sleeping in a shelter and Sophie is here in her warm bed, you'll wish you'd been reasonable. Eleanor stopped at the threshold. The snow was falling hard now, thick and wet. The driveway stretched before her like a river of ice, the iron gates at the end already starting to close. She turned back one last time. I'm taking my daughter. Her voice was steady now. Calm. The calm that comes when you've already lost everything and realize there's nothing left to fear. And when I come back, I'm taking everything else too. Marcus laughed. Patricia laughed. The sound echoed off the marble walls, bouncing around the crystal chandeliers, filling the foyer with their contempt. Eleanor walked out. The gates clanged shut behind her, the electronic lock engaging with a sound like a gunshot. She stood on the other side in the public road, the wind cutting through her jacket like 1,000 knives. Sophie was crying now, soft hiccuping sobs that broke Eleanor's heart. It's okay, baby. She pressed her lips to her daughter's cold forehead. Mommy's got you. Mommy's always got you. She walked. The nearest bus stop was 2 miles away. She had no car, no cash, no. Her phone was almost dead. Marcus had kept her on the family plan, which meant she'd lose service by morning. Her credit cards were all tied to his accounts. She had nothing. Nothing except a phone number she had memorized 23 years ago and sworn she would never call. Eleanor ducked under the awning of a closed grocery store, trying to shield Sophie from the worst of the wind. Her fingers were already numb, but she managed to pull out her phone and dial. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "Whitmore and Associates. How may I direct your call?" Eleanor closed her eyes. 23 years. She had run away at 11 years old, run from the press, the expectations, the goldfish bowl life of being Richard Whitmore's only child. She had changed her name, buried her past, built an entirely new identity. And now she was about to tear it all down. "This is Eleanor." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Eleanor Whitmore. I need to speak with my father." Silence on the other end. Then, "Ms. Whitmore, the partners have been trying to reach you for years. Your father. He'll want to know immediately. Please hold." The hold music was classical. Chopin, maybe. Eleanor remembered her father playing Chopin on the grand piano in their Fifth Avenue apartment, back when she still lived there, back before she understood what his name meant, and why everyone looked at her differently because of it. "Eleanor." His voice. Older now, rougher, but unmistakably his. "Dad." She heard him inhale sharply. 23 years of silence broken by a single word. "Where are you?" No recriminations, no anger, just the immediate practicality that had made Richard Whitmore one of the most respected judges, now senior partner in New York legal history. "Ridgemont Road, outside a grocery store." "Dad, they threw me out. They took everything. They're trying to take Sophie." "Sophie, my daughter, your granddaughter. She's 3. Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. He was clearly fighting to control. "I'm sending a car. Don't move. 30 minutes. Dad, I don't have anywhere to—" "You're coming home, Eleanor. You and my granddaughter are coming home." The line went dead. Eleanor slid down the wall, pulling Sophie closer, and for the first time in 12 years, she let herself cry. 28 minutes later, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. The back door opened, and a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and sharp blue eyes stepped out holding a thick wool blanket. "Miss Eleanor." The woman's voice was crisp, efficient, but her eyes were warm. "I'm Margaret, your father's assistant. Let's get you and the little one warmed up." Eleanor couldn't speak. She let Margaret guide her into the heated car, wrap Sophie in the blanket, produce a thermos of hot chocolate from somewhere. Sophie stopped crying almost immediately, her little hands wrapped around the warm cup, her eyes drooping with exhaustion. "Your father wanted to come himself," Margaret said as the car pulled away. "I had to physically stop him. He's been waiting a long time for this call, Miss Eleanor. He could have found me, if he wanted to." "He found you the second week you were gone." Margaret's voice was matter-of-fact. "Tracked you to the diner in Brooklyn, watched you from across the street every Sunday for the first 2 years just to make sure you were safe." Eleanor's breath caught. "I never saw him." "He didn't want you to. He said—" Margaret hesitated. "He said you had to choose to come back. He wasn't going to force you. He wasn't going to be the father who dragged his daughter home like property." She glanced at Sophie, who was drifting off to sleep. "He'll be different with her, I think. He's had 23 years to think about what he did wrong with you." The drive took 45 minutes, winding through the city streets until they reached a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. Not the Fifth Avenue mansion Eleanor had grown up in, this was smaller, warmer, filled with books and photographs and the faint smell of pipe tobacco. Richard Whitmore was waiting in the doorway. He was 71 now, his hair completely white, his face lined with age, and what Eleanor suspected were years of regret. But he still stood straight. He still had those sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. He looked at her. He looked at the sleeping child in her arms. And for the first time in Eleanor's memory, Richard Whitmore's composure cracked. "Ellie," he whispered. The childhood nickname. The one he used to call her before everything went wrong. "Oh, my Ellie." She walked into his arms. Sophie between them, 3 generations pressed together in a drafty Brooklyn doorway. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just held her like he would never let go again. And somewhere in the back of Eleanor's mind, the wheels began to turn. Marcus Ashford thought he had married a nobody, a waitress, a dropout, a woman who should be grateful for every scrap he threw her way. He had no idea that the woman he had just thrown into the snow was the only daughter of the man who could make or break every powerful family in New York. He had no idea that for the past 7 years she had been secretly earning her law degree online, studying every night after he went to sleep, passing the bar exam under her maiden name. He had no idea that the distant cousin who had saved his company with a last-minute investment wasn't a cousin at all. It was a shell company owned by a trust that had been sitting in Eleanor's name since she was born. Marcus Ashford owned nothing. The company he bragged about, the mansion he lorded over her, the success he wore like a badge, all of it was built on money he didn't know belonged to his wife. And in 3 weeks, when they met in that courtroom, he was going to find out exactly who he had thrown away. Eleanor looked up at her father, the snow falling softly around them. "I need a lawyer, Dad. The best you have." Richard Whitmore smiled. It was a slow, dangerous smile that had made opposing counsel nervous for 40 years. "My darling girl," he said, "I thought you'd never ask." 3 weeks. That's all the time Eleanor had before the court date. 3 weeks to dismantle a marriage that had taken 12 years to build. 3 weeks to expose a man who believed himself untouchable. 3 weeks to get her daughter back. She spent the first night in her father's guest room. Sophie curled against her chest, both of them too exhausted to dream. When morning came, Eleanor opened her eyes to find Richard sitting in the armchair beside the bed watching them sleep. "How long have you been there?" she asked, her voice rough. "A few hours." He didn't apologize. He didn't look away. "I've missed 23 years of mornings, Ellie. I'm not missing anymore." Sophie stirred, rubbing her eyes. She looked at the strange old man in the chair, then up at her mother, confusion clouding her small face. "Mommy, where's Daddy?" Eleanor's heart cracked. How do you explain to a 3-year-old that her father threw them away like garbage? "Daddy's at his house, sweetheart. We're staying with Grandpa now." "Grandpa?" Sophie blinked at Richard. "I have a grandpa." Richard leaned forward, his eyes glistening. "You do, little one, and I'm going to spoil you absolutely rotten. Starting with pancakes. Do you like pancakes?" Sophie's face lit up. "With chocolate chips. With whatever you want." Richard stood up, extending his hand. "Come on, let's give your mother a few minutes to wake up." Eleanor watched them go, her daughter's tiny hand wrapped around her father's weathered fingers. The sight made her chest ache in ways she couldn't name. Then she threw off the covers and got to work. By noon, Eleanor had transformed her father's study into a war room. Files spread across every surface. Bank statements, corporate documents, the prenuptial agreement she had signed at 22, too naive to question the man she loved. And the evidence she had been secretly gathering for the past 3 weeks, ever since she found those texts from Megan. "You've been busy." Richard stood in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. "I recognize that look. It's the same one I had before every big case." "I'm not going in blind, Dad." Eleanor took the coffee without looking up. "Marcus thinks I'm a helpless waitress with no resources. He has no idea I've been documenting everything." "Everything? The affair, the financial discrepancies, the way he's been leveraging assets he doesn't fully own." She pulled out a folder and handed it to him. "Look at the 2019 investment, the one that saved Ashford Financial from bankruptcy." Richard opened the folder. His eyebrows rose slowly as he read, "The Artemis Group." He looked up at her. "This is the shell company your mother set up before she died. The one that's been sitting in your trust since you were born." Marcus doesn't know it exists. He thinks Artemis is just a silent investor, some venture capital firm he never bothered to research. Eleanor's voice hardened. He's been using my money to build his empire for 7 years, Dad. Every board meeting, every expansion, every shareholder dividend funded by a trust he doesn't know belongs to his wife. Richard set down the folder. Why didn't you tell him all these years? Why keep it secret? The question hung in the air. Eleanor had asked herself the same thing 1,000 times. Because I wanted to be loved for me. The words came out smaller than she intended. Not for your money. Not for your name. I wanted one person in the world to look at me and see Eleanor, not Richard Whitmore's daughter. Not the heiress. Just me. And Marcus. Marcus saw exactly what I showed him. A poor girl who would be grateful for anything he gave her. A placeholder. She spat the word like poison. His mother's word, not mine. That's what she called me the night they threw me out. A placeholder. Richard's jaw tightened. Patricia Ashford. You know her. I know the type. Old money pretensions built on new money desperation. He sat down across from her. What do you want, Ellie? Not what you're owed legally. I can calculate that myself. What do you actually want? Eleanor closed her eyes. She saw Sophie's face, confused and scared, in the back of that sedan. She saw Marcus laughing as she walked into the snow. She saw 12 years of her life crumbling into dust. I want Sophie. Full custody, no visitation. That's difficult. Fathers have rights, even bad ones. He doesn't want her, Dad. He wants to control me. Sophie is leverage, nothing more. If I can prove he's an unfit parent. Is he? Eleanor hesitated. The truth was complicated. Marcus wasn't physically abusive. He wasn't cruel to Sophie directly. He was simply absent, emotionally vacant, more interested in his phone than his daughter's first words. He left his 3-year-old daughter in the care of his mother, who called that child half Ashford, like the other half was defective. He tried to keep her while throwing me into a blizzard without a coat. Eleanor's voice rose. He's not a father. He's a collector. Sophie is just another asset to him. Richard nodded slowly. And the company? I want it. All of it. Every share, every patent, every piece of furniture in that mansion. She met his eyes. He built his success on my foundation. I want it back. That's war, Ellie, not a divorce settlement. He started the war the night he threw me out. She stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the Brooklyn street below. I'm just finishing it. Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone. There's someone you should meet. He's the best divorce attorney I've ever seen in action. He hasn't taken a case in 15 years, but he owes me a favor. Who? Richard smiled. Rick Donovan. And before you ask, yes, he's as good as the legends say. Rick Donovan didn't look like a legend. He looked like someone's grandfather cardigan, reading glasses, a face lined with smile creases, and what Eleanor suspected was a lifetime of late nights. His office was small, cramped with files, and smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and old paper. But the moment he shook Eleanor's hand, she understood. His grip was firm, his eyes were sharp, and when he looked at her, she felt like he was reading every secret she had ever kept. Richard's daughter. It wasn't a question. I can see it. Same jaw, same stubborn set of the shoulders. You know my father. We've been on opposite sides of a few courtrooms. Rick gestured for her to sit. He usually won. I won the ones that mattered. He pulled out a legal pad already covered with notes. He called me this morning, gave me the broad strokes. May I be blunt? Please. Your husband is an idiot. Eleanor blinked. I'm sorry. Marcus Ashford. Rick tapped his pen against the pad. I've spent 3 hours researching him, his company, his financials, his legal history. The man is a walking liability, dressed in a nice suit. He's leveraged assets he doesn't fully own, misrepresented his inventorship on multiple patents, and his corporate expense reports are so sloppy, a first-year law student could spot the fraud. That's good. That's a gift from heaven, Ms. Whitmore. Rick leaned forward. Your husband doesn't think he's ever going to be challenged. He surrounded himself with yes-men and flatterers. His lawyer, Arthur Grimshaw, is flashy but lazy. He wins cases through intimidation, not preparation. And he's clearly never dealt with anyone like you. You mean someone with resources? I mean someone who's been quietly building a case against him for years without him noticing. Rick held up one of the documents she'd sent over that morning. This company ledger. Where did you get it? I've had administrative access to all of Marcus's accounts since we got married. He never bothered to change the passwords. And the patent applications, the original code repositories. I wrote them. The early software, the algorithms that made the company viable, Marcus took credit, but I did the work. He doesn't know I kept copies of everything. Rick stared at her for a long moment. Then he started to laugh. It wasn't a mocking laugh. It was the delighted laugh of a chess player who had just realized his opponent had walked into an inescapable trap. Ms. Whitmore, he said, wiping his eyes. I'm going to enjoy this. So, the next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Rick built the case like a surgeon preparing for an operation. Every document reviewed, every timeline verified, every potential counterargument anticipated and dismantled before Marcus's team could even think of it. Eleanor spent her days in Rick's office answering questions, providing context, watching the evidence stack up like bricks in a wall that would eventually crush her husband. Sophie stayed with Richard. Eleanor had been terrified at first her father had been distant cold when she was a child. But the Richard who emerged with Sophie was someone Eleanor didn't recognize. Patient, playful, down on his knees building block towers while his granddaughter giggled and knocked them over. He's different with her, Margaret observed one afternoon watching them through the kitchen window. He's making up for lost time. Eleanor's voice was softer than she intended. We all are, Miss Eleanor. Margaret squeezed her shoulder. We all are. The court date loomed closer. Arthur Grimshaw filed motion after motion, trying to delay, to obfuscate, to bury Eleanor in paperwork. Rick countered every move with surgical precision. They're getting nervous, Rick reported during one of their late-night sessions. Grimshaw just requested a continuance. He's claiming he needs more time to review newly discovered evidence. What newly discovered evidence? Rick smiled. Exactly. There isn't any. He's stalling because he knows something is wrong, but he can't figure out what. Marcus has been calling the office 4 times a day, screaming at his assistants. Good. Let him sweat. Eleanor went to bed that night feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The call came at 3 a.m., 5 days before the court date. Eleanor fumbled for her phone in the darkness, her heart already pounding. Hello. Mrs. Ashford. A woman's voice. Young, nervous. This is Megan Torres. I work for your husband. Eleanor sat up straight. The other woman. The one Marcus had been mentoring. Why are you calling me? Because I need you to know something. Before the court date. Megan's voice dropped to a whisper. Marcus doesn't know I'm calling. He'd kill me if he found out. Then why take the risk? Silence on the other end. Then, because I made a mistake. I thought he loved me. I thought I was special. But I heard him on the phone last night talking to his mother. Eleanor's blood ran cold. What did he say? He said once the divorce is final and he has full custody of Sophie, he's going to ship her off to boarding school in Switzerland. He called her a complication. He said he never wanted kids, but now that he has one, he might as well use her for the tax benefits. Eleanor's grip on the phone tightened until her knuckles went white. He also said something about you, something about making sure you never see her again. He's going to claim you're mentally unstable. He's got a doctor lined up to testify that you're a danger to yourself and others. That's a lie. I know. That's why I'm calling. Megan took a shaky breath. I'm not a home wrecker, Mrs. Ashford. I know that's what you think of me, and maybe I deserve it, but I'm not going to help a man destroy his own daughter's life just to win a court case. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Then, why should I trust you? You shouldn't, but I'm going to send you something. Recordings. I've been keeping them for months, ever since Marcus started talking about contingency plans. I didn't know what he meant at first. Now I do. A text notification buzzed. Eleanor pulled the phone away from her ear, long enough to see a series of audio files downloading. Use them, Megan said. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry. I didn't know who he really was. The line went dead. Eleanor stared at her phone. Then she pressed play on the first recording. Marcus's voice filled the darkness. Sophie is leverage, nothing more. Once Eleanor is out of the picture, we ship the kid off and forget she exists. I've got better things to do than play daddy. Eleanor's hands were shaking. She played the next recording. The Whitmore woman thinks she's smart, but she's got nothing. No money, no connections, no lawyer worth a damn. Grimshaw says it'll be over in 10 minutes. We walk out with everything, she walks out with nothing. Just like she deserves. And the next. Patricia, stop worrying. The prenup is ironclad. She signed it when she was too stupid and in love to read the fine print. She's got nothing. She is nothing. She always has been. Eleanor sat in the dark listening to her husband describe her like a pest to be exterminated. And something inside her shifted. For 12 years, she had tried to be enough. Good enough. Quiet enough. Invisible enough. No more. She forwarded the recordings to Rick Donovan. Then she lay back down, Sophie snoring softly beside her, and smiled. Game on. 2 days before the court date, the first bomb dropped. Not in the courtroom, in the newspaper. Tech CEO faces fraud allegations, screamed the headline in the business section. The article detailed mysterious discrepancies in Ashford Financial's patent applications, specifically questions about whether Marcus Ashford had actually invented the algorithms he claimed credit for. No source was named, but Eleanor recognized Rick's fingerprints. You leaked it, she said during their morning meeting. I have no idea what you're talking about. Rick didn't look up from his coffee. Journalists investigate things. It's what they do. The timing seems convenient. Doesn't it? He finally met her eyes. Funny how these things work out. By the way, Marcus called Grimshaw in a panic this morning, screamed at him for 20 minutes about controlling the narrative. Grimshaw apparently told him to shut up and stop making things worse. Did he listen? What do you think? Eleanor smiled. It felt strange on her face, she'd almost forgotten how. There's something else you should know, Rick said, setting down his cup. I got a call from Sterling Enterprises this morning. The company Marcus was trying to merge with. The same. Thomas Sterling, the CEO, is an old friend of your father's. They had lunch yesterday. Rick paused meaningfully. It seems Mr. Sterling was very interested to learn about the true ownership structure of Ashford Financial, particularly the part where the majority stakeholder is someone named Eleanor Whitmore. My father told him, your father may have mentioned it in passing, along with the fact that any merger negotiations would need to be renegotiated with the actual owner of the company. Eleanor leaned back in her chair. Marcus is going to lose the merger. Marcus is going to lose everything. Rick gathered his files. But we need to make sure it happens in the right order. The court date first. Get custody of Sophie locked in before we pull the financial rug out from under him. Once he realizes he's broke, he might do something desperate. Desperate how? Rick's face hardened. Desperate like taking your daughter and running. Desperate like hiding assets offshore. Desperate like paying someone to make problems go away. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. You think he would hurt Sophie? I think a cornered animal does terrible things. We need to be prepared for anything. The night before the court date, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She stood at the window of her father's study, looking out at the city lights, trying to imagine how tomorrow would unfold. Sophie was asleep upstairs. Richard was in his study still working because that's what Whitmores did when they were nervous. "You should rest." Her father's voice came from behind her. "I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face. That smirk when he handed me the check. The way he laughed when I walked out the door." Richard moved to stand beside her. 12 years is a long time to pretend to be someone you're not. "I wasn't pretending. Not entirely. I was trying to be the person he wanted me to be." "And who was that? Small, grateful, invisible." Eleanor's voice cracked. "I thought if I made myself small enough, he'd love me. I thought if I never challenged him, never outshone him, he'd see me as a partner instead of a threat. But he didn't. He saw exactly what I showed him, and he despised me for it." She turned to face her father. "That's the part that kills me. I gave him everything. My time, my money, my intelligence, and he hated me for not having anything worth taking." Richard was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Your mother was like that. Too generous. Too willing to see the best in people." He met Eleanor's eyes. "She died believing I was a good man, even when I wasn't. Even when I chose my career over my family over you." "Dad, let me finish." He held up a hand. "I spent 23 years telling myself you were better off without me. That my ambition, my coldness, my inability to show affection, all of that would have damaged you worse than my absence. But that was a lie. The truth is I was scared. Scared of being a father. Scared of failing you the way I failed your mother." Eleanor felt tears on her cheeks. She hadn't even noticed she'd started crying. "You came back, Ellie." Richard's voice broke. "After everything I did, everything I didn't do, you came back. And you brought me a granddaughter. You gave me a second chance I don't deserve. Everyone deserves a second chance, Dad. Not everyone." He reached out and took her hand. "But you do. And tomorrow we're going to make sure you get it." Eleanor squeezed his fingers. Tomorrow she would walk into that courtroom and face the man who had tried to destroy her. Tomorrow, Marcus Ashford would learn exactly what he had thrown away, and he would never recover. The morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of New York January that seeps into your bones and stays there. Eleanor dressed in silence. Navy blue suit tailored, hair pulled back in a sleek bun. Minimal jewelry, just her mother's pearl earrings, the only thing she'd kept from her old life. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw someone she barely recognized. Not the waitress Marcus had married, not the placeholder Patricia had dismissed. Someone new, someone dangerous. Sophie was still asleep when Eleanor came downstairs. Richard was waiting by the door, already in his coat. "Ready?" he asked. "No?" Eleanor picked up her briefcase. "But that's never stopped me before." The drive to the courthouse took 40 minutes. Rick Donovan met them in the lobby, his cardigan replaced by a charcoal suit that somehow made him look even more like someone's kindly grandfather. He was carrying a leather satchel stuffed with documents. "They're already here," Rick said, falling into step beside her. "Marcus Patricia Grimshaw and a team of 4 associates. They've taken over the entire left side of the courtroom. Trying to intimidate me. Trying to remind you that you're outgunned." Rick smiled. "They don't know what's in this bag." "What's the plan?" "Simple. Let Grimshaw talk first. Let him paint you as the gold-digging waitress who contributed nothing to the marriage. Let him present the prenup as ironclad. Let Marcus sit there looking smug." Rick paused at the courtroom doors. "And then we burn it all down." Eleanor took a deep breath. "Let's go." She pushed open the doors. The courtroom was smaller than she'd imagined. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lights, the faint smell of old paper and anxiety. The gallery was half full, Legal interns, a few reporters who had caught wind of the scandal, and strangers with nothing better to do on a Friday morning. And there at the plaintiff's table sat Marcus Ashford. He looked good. Expensive suit, fresh haircut, the easy confidence of a man who had never faced real consequences. Patricia sat behind him draped in furs despite the heated room, her face arranged in an expression of barely concealed triumph. Marcus saw Eleanor. His eyes flickered over her suit, her hair the man walking beside her. For a fraction of a second, something like uncertainty crossed his face. Then he smirked. The same smirk he'd worn the night he threw her out. The same smirk that said, "You're nothing. You've always been nothing." Eleanor met his gaze and didn't look away. She took her seat at the defendant's table. Rick spread his documents in front of him. Richard slipped into the gallery 3 rows back, close enough to see everything. "All rise," the bailiff called. The Honorable Judge Catherine Walsh presiding. A woman in her 60s entered from chambers. Silver hair, sharp eyes, reading glasses perched on her nose. She sat down, surveyed the courtroom, and frowned slightly when she saw the crowd. Docket number 7892, Ashford versus Ashford. She looked at the plaintiff's table. "Mr. Grimshaw, I understand you're seeking expedited dissolution based on the prenuptial agreement. Is that correct?" Arthur Grimshaw rose. He was shorter than Eleanor expected, but he carried himself like a man twice his size. His voice filled the room. "That's correct, Your Honor. My client, Mr. Marcus Ashford, seeks a dissolution of marriage based on irreconcilable differences. The prenuptial agreement signed by both parties 12 years ago clearly stipulates that in the event of divorce, each party retains the assets they brought into the marriage. Mrs. Ashford brought no significant assets. Therefore, she is entitled to nothing. And custody. Mr. Ashford requests sole physical and legal custody of the minor child Sophie Ashford, age 3. Mrs. Ashford has no stable income, no permanent residence, and a family history of financial instability that makes her an unsuitable primary caregiver." Judge Walsh turned to Eleanor's table. "And for the defense?" Rick stood slowly. He didn't project his voice. He didn't need to. The room went quiet to hear him. "Richard Donovan for the defendant, Your Honor. We contest none of the terms of the prenuptial agreement." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Marcus leaned back in his chair, relief flooding his face. "However," Rick continued, "we are filing a counter-motion based on fraudulent misrepresentation of assets, identity fraud, and violations of fiduciary duty that render the prenup unenforceable as applied." Grimshaw shot to his feet. "Objection. This is a last-minute fishing expedition. We received no notice of any counterclaims. The claims were filed this morning, per court rules." Rick pulled a thick folder from his satchel. "I have copies for opposing counsel and the bench. The evidence is extensive." Judge Walsh held out her hand. A clerk scurried forward to collect the documents. She opened the folder, began reading, and her eyebrows rose steadily higher. "Mr. Donovan, these are serious allegations." "Yes, Your Honor, they are." "Objection." Grimshaw repeated, his voice rising. "My client has no knowledge of any fraud. This is a transparent attempt to delay proceedings and—" "Mr. Grimshaw." Judge Walsh's voice cracked like a whip. "Sit down. I'm reading." Grimshaw sat. Marcus leaned over to whisper something to him. Patricia's fingers tightened on her purse. The courtroom waited. Finally, Judge Walsh looked up. "Mr. Donovan, your filing indicates that the business known as Ashford Financial was funded in significant part by an entity called the Artemis Group. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And you allege that the Artemis Group is wholly owned by a trust of which Mrs. Ashford is the sole beneficiary?" "Correct." "That's absurd!" Marcus burst out. He was on his feet before Grimshaw could stop him. "Eleanor doesn't have a trust. She doesn't have anything. She was a waitress when I met her. A nobody from nowhere." "Mr. Ashford," Judge Walsh's voice was ice, "you will address this court through your counsel. Another outburst, and I will hold you in contempt." Marcus opened his mouth. Grimshaw grabbed his arm and yanked him back into his seat. "Your Honor." Grimshaw said, his voice strained with forced calm. My client is understandably shocked by these allegations. We request a continuance to review the documents and prepare a response. Denied. Judge Walsh closed the folder. You've had 3 weeks to prepare for this hearing, Mr. Grimshaw. Your client filed for expedited proceedings. He's going to get them. She turned to Rick. Mr. Donovan, proceed with your evidence. Rick nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to call my first witness, Eleanor Whitmore Ashford. The walk from the defense table to the witness stand felt like miles. Eleanor could feel every eye in the room on her. Patricia's glare burned into her back. Marcus's confusion had shifted to something darker. Suspicion, maybe. Fear. Good. She took the oath. She sat down. Rick approached the stand. Mrs. Ashford, please state your full legal name for the record. Eleanor Catherine Whitmore Ashford. And your maiden name? Whitmore. A rustle in the gallery. Someone whispered. Eleanor saw a reporter's hand fly to her phone. Mrs. Ashford, are you related to Richard Whitmore, senior partner at Whitmore and Associates? Yes, he's my father. The whisper became a murmur. Marcus's face went pale. Can you describe your relationship with your father prior to your marriage? I ran away from home at 11 years old. I didn't speak to him for 23 years. Eleanor kept her voice steady. I changed my name. I hid my identity. I wanted to live a life that wasn't defined by my family's wealth or reputation. And did you disclose your true identity to your husband? No. I told him I was Eleanor Hayes, that my father had died, and that I had no family money. Why? Eleanor looked directly at Marcus. Because I wanted to know if someone could love me for who I was, not for what I could give them. And did Mr. Ashford love you for who you were? Grimshaw rose. Objection. Calls for speculation. Withdrawn. Rick didn't miss a beat. Mrs. Ashford, let's discuss the Artemis Group. Are you familiar with this entity? I became familiar with it 3 weeks ago when I began investigating my husband's business. And what did you discover? The Artemis Group provided 85% of the seed funding for Ashford Financial in 2012. The investment was structured as a callable loan, meaning the beneficiary can demand full repayment at any time. Eleanor paused. The Artemis Group is wholly owned by a trust established in 1993 by my mother before her death. I am the sole beneficiary. The courtroom erupted. Order. Judge Walsh banged her gavel. Order. Grimshaw was on his feet. Your Honor, this is hearsay. We need documentation, verification. The documentation is in the folder, Mr. Grimshaw. Rick's voice cut through the chaos. Trust documents, banking records, loan agreements, all notarized, all verified by independent auditors. Marcus grabbed Grimshaw's arm. This is impossible. That money came from a venture capital firm. I met their representative. He was an attorney from my father's firm, Eleanor said from the witness stand, sent to make sure the investment was handled properly. Marcus stared at her. His face had gone gray. You're telling me, he said slowly, that you've owned my company this whole time. I'm telling you that you've been spending my money for 7 years, Marcus. Every expansion, every acquisition, every bonus you paid yourself. Eleanor leaned forward. You built your empire on my foundation, and you never even knew. Patricia stood up in the gallery. This is a trick. She's lying. She's always been a liar and Mrs. Ashford, sit down. Judge Walsh's voice could have frozen fire. One more word and I'll have you removed. Patricia sat, her face purple with rage. Rick approached the bench. Your Honor, I have additional evidence to present. Evidence of systematic fraud in Mr. Ashford's business dealings, evidence of falsified patent applications, and evidence of Mr. Ashford's plans regarding his minor daughter. What plans? Judge Walsh asked. Rick pulled out a small device. These are audio recordings provided by a third-party witness. They have been authenticated by a forensic expert. With the court's permission, I'd like to play them." Grimshaw's face went white. "Your Honor, we object to any recordings obtained without—" "The recordings were made by a participant in the conversations," Rick said. "They're admissible under New York's one-party consent law." Judge Walsh nodded. "Play them." The first recording filled the courtroom, Marcus's voice clear and unmistakable. "Sophie is leverage, nothing more. Once Eleanor is out of the picture, we ship the kid off and forget she exists. I've got better things to do than play daddy." A woman gasped in the gallery. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. The second recording, the Whitmore woman thinks she's smart, but she's got nothing. No money, no connections, no lawyer worth a damn. Grimshaw says it'll be over in 10 minutes. And the third, Patricia, stop worrying. The prenup is ironclad. She signed it when she was too stupid and in love to read the fine print. She's got nothing. She is nothing. She always has been. Silence. Marcus sat frozen. His handsome face, the one Eleanor had loved for so many years, looked like a mask that had cracked down the middle. "Those recordings," Judge Walsh said slowly, "appear to demonstrate not only contempt for the defendant, but a clear intention to use the minor child as a bargaining tool, rather than as a parent with genuine caregiving interests." "Your Honor." Grimshaw's voice was barely a whisper. "My client." He was speaking casually, out of context. "Mr. Grimshaw." Judge Walsh removed her reading glasses. "Your client just called the mother of his child nothing 3 times in recorded conversations. He expressed plans to abandon his daughter in a boarding school, and you expect me to believe this is out of context?" Grimshaw had no answer. Rick stepped forward. "Your Honor, there's one more thing. The intellectual property that Mr. Ashford claims as the foundation of his company, the algorithms, the predictive software, these were not created by him." "Then who created them?" "Mrs. Ashford." Rick handed another document to the bench. "We have the original code repositories with timestamps authored on Mrs. Ashford's personal laptop. She wrote the core algorithms while working nights at a diner to support her husband's startup. She never claimed credit because she was trying to help him succeed." Eleanor watched Marcus's face as the words hit home. All those nights, all those times he had complained about bugs in the software, and she had quietly fixed them. All those times he had taken credit for innovations she had created. "She did the work," Rick said. "He took the credit, and now he's trying to take her daughter too." Judge Walsh stared at the documents. Then she stared at Marcus. "Mr. Ashford, I've been on this bench for 32 years. I've seen every kind of divorce case imaginable. But I have never seen such a comprehensive display of arrogance, fraud, and cruelty." "Your Honor." "I'm not finished." Her voice cracked like thunder. "You didn't just deceive your wife. You built your entire career on her money, her intelligence, and her labor. And when she wasn't useful anymore, you threw her into a blizzard with a 3-year-old child and called her nothing. I can explain. No, Mr. Ashford, you can't." Judge Walsh picked up her gavel. "I'm granting the defendant's countermotion in full. All assets of Ashford Financial are frozen pending a forensic audit. Sole custody of the minor child is awarded to Mrs. Ashford effective immediately. Mr. Ashford will have no unsupervised contact with the child until a psychological evaluation can be completed." "No." Marcus stood up, knocking his chair backward. "You can't do this. I built that company. It's mine." "Security." Judge Walsh didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Remove Mr. Ashford from my courtroom." 2 bailiffs moved forward. Marcus tried to push past them, his face twisted with rage. "Eleanor!" He was shouting now, all pretense of control gone. "Eleanor, you can't do this. I gave you everything. You were nothing before me." Eleanor stood. She walked toward him, stopping just out of arm's reach. The bailiffs held him, but his eyes tracked her every move. "You're right, Marcus." Her voice was calm, steady, unbreakable. "I was nothing before you. I chose to be nothing. I made myself small so you could feel big. She leaned closer. But here's the thing about being nothing. Nothing has nothing to lose. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the crumpled check he had thrown at her 3 weeks ago. The one for $5,000. The one she had knocked off his desk, and he had never bothered to pick up. She pressed it into his hand. "Severance pay," she said. "Consider it a fresh start." The bailiffs dragged him away. Patricia tried to follow, tried to reach her son, but a security guard blocked her path. She turned to Eleanor, her face contorted with hatred. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You'll regret this. You'll regret ever crossing this family." Eleanor looked at the woman who had called her a placeholder, who had laughed while she walked into the snow, who had tried to take her daughter. "Ma'am," Eleanor said softly, "I'm not crossing your family. I'm ending it." She turned and walked away. Rick was waiting by the defense table, a rare smile on his weathered face. "That was everything I hoped for, and more." "Is it done?" "The custody ruling is final. The asset freeze is in place. Marcus will spend the next 6 months fighting forensic auditors who will find every piece of fraud he ever committed." Rick gathered his files. "But there's one more thing. Thomas Sterling called while we were in session. He wants to meet with you, today if possible. The merger is dead, but Sterling wants to negotiate directly with the actual owner of Ashford Financial." Rick paused. "That would be you." Eleanor looked back at the courtroom. Marcus was gone. Patricia was still standing in the gallery alone, looking at the empty chairs, like she couldn't understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. "Tell Sterling I'll meet him," Eleanor said. "But not at his office." "Where then?" Eleanor smiled. It was the first real smile she'd allowed herself in 12 years. "The Bluebird Diner, Brooklyn, the place where this all started." Richard was waiting in the hallway. He didn't say anything when she emerged. He just opened his arms. Eleanor walked into them. "Sophie," she asked against his shoulder. "Margaret is bringing her. She should be here in 20 minutes. I want to hold her." "You'll hold her for the rest of your life, Ellie." Richard's voice cracked. "No one is ever taking her from you again." They stood there in the courthouse hallway, father and daughter survivors of their own private wars. Around them, lawyers hurried past phones, buzzed, life continued in its endless churn. But for Eleanor, time had stopped. She had walked into that courtroom as a victim. She walked out as something else entirely. And somewhere in the city, Marcus Ashford sat in a holding room watching his empire crumble, finally understanding the truth that had been in front of him all along. The woman he had thrown away was never nothing. She was everything, and she had just taken it all back. 20 minutes after the verdict, Sophie arrived at the courthouse. Margaret brought her through a side entrance away from the reporters, who had already begun gathering on the front steps. The little girl was wearing a purple coat, new purchased by Richard the day after they arrived in Brooklyn, and her blonde curls bounced as she ran down the hallway. "Mommy!" Eleanor dropped to her knees and caught her daughter mid-leap. She buried her face in Sophie's hair, breathing in the smell of baby shampoo and innocence, feeling the small arms wrap around her neck with absolute trust. "Hey, baby girl," her voice broke. "Mommy missed you." "Grandpa made me waffles." Sophie pulled back, her face serious. "With extra syrup. Don't tell him I told you." Eleanor laughed. It came out wet, mixed with tears she couldn't stop. "Your secret's safe with me." Richard stood nearby, watching them with an expression Eleanor had never seen on his face before. Pride, love, regret for all the years he had missed. "We should go," Rick said gently. "The press is going to find us any minute. I've arranged a car in the back." Eleanor stood, lifting Sophie onto her hip. "Where are we going?" "Home. You're home now, the brownstone." Rick checked his phone. "Thomas Sterling confirmed for 4 o'clock at the diner. That gives you 3 hours to rest and prepare." "I don't need rest." "You need to hold your daughter," Rick said. "Everything else can wait." He was right. Eleanor knew he was right. but her mind was already racing ahead, calculating the next moves, anticipating Marcus's response. A cornered animal was dangerous. A humiliated narcissist was worse. What happens to Marcus now? He's being processed. The contempt charge will keep him in holding for a few hours. After that, he's free to go, but his assets are frozen, his company is under investigation, and his reputation is destroyed. Rick opened the back door. He's going to spend the next few months watching everything he built turn to ash. Will he fight back? Rick's face hardened. Count on it. Men like Marcus don't accept defeat. They reframe it. Right now he's probably convincing himself that you cheated, that the judge was biased, that this is all some conspiracy against him. He met her eyes. Stay alert. Don't go anywhere alone. And don't underestimate his mother. Patricia has survived worse than this. Eleanor nodded. She climbed into the car, Sophie still in her arms. Richard slid in beside her. As the vehicle pulled away, she looked back at the courthouse. Somewhere inside, Marcus Ashford was learning what it felt like to have nothing. She should have felt satisfaction, triumph, justice. Instead, she felt tired, bone-deep exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. 12 years. She had given him 12 years, and now it was time to build something new. The brownstone was quiet when they arrived. Margaret had prepared lunch, but Eleanor couldn't eat. She sat on the couch with Sophie in her lap, reading Goodnight Moon, for the third time, letting the familiar words wash over her like a lullaby. Mommy. Sophie's voice was small. Is Daddy coming? Eleanor's heart clenched. She had been dreading this question. No, sweetheart. Daddy's not coming. Why? How do you explain cruelty to a 3-year-old? How do you tell a child that her father saw her as leverage, not love? How do you break a heart without destroying it? Daddy and Mommy aren't going to live together anymore. Eleanor kept her voice gentle. But that doesn't mean we don't love you. You're the most important person in the whole world. More important than waffles. Eleanor laughed despite herself. Way more important than waffles. Sophie seemed to accept this. Children were resilient that way. They lived in the present, unburdened by the weight of the past. Eleanor wished she could do the same. At 3:30, she handed Sophie to Margaret and went upstairs to change. The navy suit felt like armor, now battle-tested, victorious. She kept it on. Richard met her at the door. I want to come with you. No. Eleanor shook her head. This meeting is mine. Sterling needs to see that I can handle this alone. You've never handled a negotiation like this before. I've been handling Marcus for 12 years. I think I can manage one businessman. She kissed his cheek. Besides, you have a granddaughter who needs spoiling. I believe you promised her ice cream. Richard's face softened. She told you about that. She tells me everything. We're working on the concept of secrets. The car dropped her at the Bluebird Diner at exactly 4 o'clock. It looked exactly the same as she remembered. Blue vinyl booths, chrome fixtures, the smell of coffee and bacon grease. She had spent 5 years behind that counter, slinging hash and refilling cups, hiding from a world that expected her to be something she wasn't. Thomas Sterling was already there, sitting in a corner booth. He was older than Eleanor expected, mid-60s, silver hair, the weathered face of someone who had built and lost and rebuilt more than once. He stood when she approached. His handshake was firm. Mrs. Ashford, or should I say Ms. Whitmore. Eleanor is fine. She slid into the booth across from him. Thank you for meeting me here. An interesting choice of venue. Sterling looked around, taking in the worn linoleum and flickering neon sign. Not quite what I expected from Richard Whitmore's daughter. I spent 5 years working here, before I met Marcus, before I became someone else. Eleanor met his gaze. I wanted to remember who I was before I decide who I'm going to become. Sterling studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled. Your father said you were formidable. I'm beginning to see what he meant. You know my father. We've done business over the years. He helped me navigate a hostile takeover in 2015. Cost me a fortune in legal fees, but worth every penny. Sterling leaned back. He also called me last week, told me to take a very close look at the ownership structure of Ashford Financial. And what did you find? That Marcus Ashford is either the unluckiest man in New York or the stupidest. Sterling's voice hardened. He tried to sell me a company he didn't own, using patents he didn't create funded by money he didn't know existed. If the deal had gone through, I would have been holding worthless paper. The deal won't go through. No, it won't. Sterling pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. But I still want the technology. The algorithms your ex-husband has been parading around as his own work. If you actually wrote them, they're worth far more than he ever realized. Eleanor opened the folder. Inside was an acquisition offer. Not a merger, a straight purchase. The number at the bottom made her breath catch. This is 3 times what Marcus was negotiating. Marcus was negotiating with desperation. I'm negotiating with the actual owner. Sterling tapped the paper. This is a fair price, more than fair, and it comes with conditions. What conditions? I want you on the board, not as a figurehead, as an active participant. The technology is yours. You should be part of its future. Eleanor stared at the offer. 2 months ago, she had been counting pennies to buy groceries, hiding receipts from Marcus so he wouldn't criticize her spending. Now she was holding a piece of paper that would make her independently wealthy for the rest of her life. Why? She asked. You could buy the company through the bankruptcy proceedings for a fraction of this price. I could. Sterling didn't deny it. But I've spent 40 years in business, Eleanor. I've learned that how you acquire something matters as much as what you acquire. If I vulture the company from the ashes, I get the technology, but I lose the talent. The employees will scatter. The reputation will be damaged. He leaned forward. If I partner with you, the woman who actually built the thing, I get legitimacy. I get continuity, and I get to sleep at night knowing I didn't profit from another man's cruelty. Eleanor read through the offer again. The terms were straightforward. Clean. No hidden clauses, no poison pills. I need to have my lawyers review this. Of course. Take a week. Take 2. Sterling stood and extended his hand. But Eleanor, don't wait too long. The vultures are circling. If you don't control the narrative, someone else will. He left a $100 bill on the table for their coffee and walked out. Eleanor sat alone in the booth, staring at the paper that would change everything. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rick Marcus released, headed to the mansion. Be careful. She should go home. She should let the lawyers handle it. She should stay far away from the man who had tried to destroy her. But there was something she needed to do first. Something she needed to see. The mansion looked different in the afternoon light. Eleanor had the car drop her at the end of the driveway, outside the iron gates that had locked behind her 3 weeks ago. The same gates, the same stones, the same cold wind cutting through her coat. But everything else had changed. A moving truck was parked by the service entrance. Workers carried boxes and furniture, while a woman in a business suit supervised, clipboard in hand. The court-appointed receiver, Eleanor realized, already cataloging assets preparing for liquidation. The gates were open. No one stopped her as she walked through. She found Marcus on the front steps. He was sitting alone, still in the suit he'd worn to court, staring at the chaos around him. His tie was loose. His hair was disheveled. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. He didn't notice her until she was standing directly in front of him. Eleanor. His voice was hollow. Come to gloat? No. She sat down on the steps beside him. Not close, but not far. I came to understand. Understand what? Why? She looked at the mansion, at the workers stripping it bare. Why wasn't I enough, Marcus? What was so wrong with me that you had to destroy me? He laughed. It was an ugly sound, devoid of humor. You were never supposed to matter. He didn't look at her. You were supposed to be temporary, someone to cook and clean and make me look respectable while I built something real. But you kept staying. You kept being useful. And then Sophie happened, and suddenly I was trapped in a life I never wanted with a woman I never loved. The words should have hurt. They didn't. They just confirmed what Eleanor had always suspected. You never loved me. I tried. For a moment, something almost human flickered in his eyes. In the beginning, I tried. You were sweet and eager, and you looked at me like I was the most important person in the world. I liked that. I needed that. His voice hardened. But then you started having opinions, suggestions. You wanted to be a partner instead of an accessory, and I realized you weren't sweet anymore. You were a threat. A threat to what? To me. He finally met her eyes. You were smarter than me, Eleanor. I knew it from the second year. You saw problems I couldn't see. You fixed things I didn't understand. And every time you helped me, every time you made me look good, I hated you a little more. Eleanor sat with that truth. The man she had loved, the man she had sacrificed everything for, had hated her for being competent, for being capable, for being everything he needed and everything he feared. What happens now? She asked. Now? Marcus looked at the mansion. Now I lose everything. The company, the house, the reputation. My mother is already talking about selling her jewelry, except it turns out most of it is fake. I bought counterfeits years ago to save money. He laughed bitterly. Even my lies had lies underneath them. And Patricia, she's inside, packing what little she's allowed to keep. His jaw tightened. She's been crying all day. Says I've destroyed the family name. As if she didn't spend 20 years teaching me that image was all that mattered. Eleanor should have felt triumph. She should have felt vindicated. This was everything she had wanted. Marcus humiliated, broken, stripped of his power. Instead, she felt hollow. I'm not going to destroy you, Marcus. He looked at her sharply. What? The company sale will go through. You'll get nothing from it. The debts will absorb everything. But I'm not going to press additional charges. I'm not going to drag this out for years. She stood up. You're going to spend the rest of your life knowing that everything you had came from me. That's punishment enough. You think you're being merciful? I think I'm being practical. Eleanor looked down at him, the man who had once seemed so tall, so powerful, so far above her. I have a daughter to raise, a company to rebuild, a life to live. I'm not going to waste any more of it on you. She turned to walk away. Eleanor. She stopped, didn't turn around. I'm sorry. The words hung in the air. 2 words she had waited 12 years to hear. 2 words that might have changed everything if they had come at any other moment. No, you're not. Her voice was steady. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry you lost. But you're not sorry for what you did to me. You're not capable of it. She walked away. She didn't look back. The phone call came at midnight. Eleanor was in her father's study reviewing the Sterling offer with Rick when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She answered it without thinking. Is this Eleanor Whitmore? A woman's voice. Professional. Familiar. Speaking. This is Detective Sarah Chen, NYPD Financial Crimes Unit. We met briefly at the courthouse today. Eleanor's blood ran cold. What's wrong? It's about Marcus Ashford. He was arrested 2 hours ago at JFK Airport. He was attempting to board a flight to the Cayman Islands with a suitcase containing $300,000 in cash. Eleanor's hand tightened on the phone. How did he get that much money? His assets are frozen. That's what we're trying to determine. The cash appears to have been withdrawn from a corporate account that wasn't included in the initial freeze order, an account he opened last week under a shell company name. $300,000. He had been planning to run, to abandon Sophie, abandon his mother, abandon everything and disappear to a country with no extradition treaty. What happens now? He's being charged with contempt of court violation of the asset freeze and attempted flight to avoid prosecution. He won't be getting bail this time. Detective Chen paused. I thought you should know before it hits the press tomorrow. Eleanor thanked her and hung up. Rick was watching her carefully. What happened? Marcus tried to run. Her voice sounded distant even to her own ears. He had hidden money. He was going to disappear. Are you surprised? No. And she wasn't. Not really. I'm just tired. Tired of being surprised by how low he can go. Rick reached over and took her hand. His grip was warm, steady. It's over now, Eleanor. Really over. He's going to prison. The company is yours. Sophie is safe. He squeezed her fingers. You won. She looked at the sterling offer on the desk. At the documents that represented her new life, her new future. Then why doesn't it feel like winning? Because winning isn't supposed to feel like this. Rick's voice was gentle. Winning is supposed to feel triumphant, victorious. But when you win against someone you loved, someone you built a life with, it just feels like grief. Eleanor closed her eyes. Grief. That was the word. She was grieving for the life she thought she had, for the man she thought she married, for the 12 years she could never get back. What do I do now? Now. Rick stood up. Now you sleep. Tomorrow you sign the sterling deal. And then you start building something new. Something that's actually yours. He left her alone in the study. Eleanor sat in the darkness for a long time, listening to the old house settle around her. Somewhere upstairs, Sophie was sleeping in her new room surrounded by new toys, safe in a way she had never been in the mansion. That was what mattered. Not the company, not the money, not the victory. Sophie was safe. Eleanor picked up the sterling offer and signed her name at the bottom. Then she went upstairs, crawled into bed beside her daughter, and finally let herself cry. In the morning she would be strong again. In the morning she would start over. But tonight she was allowed to grieve. 3 years passed like water through open fingers. Eleanor stood at the window of her corner office on the 47th floor, watching the city spread out beneath her like a living map. Behind her, the walls were covered with awards, magazine covers, photos of Sophie at various ages. A life rebuilt from the ashes of the one that had burned. Ms. Whitmore. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. The journalist from Forbes is here for your 4 o'clock. Send her in. The interview lasted an hour. The same questions Eleanor had answered 100 times before. How did you build Whitmore Technologies into a billion-dollar company? What advice do you have for women in business? How do you balance being a CEO with being a mother? She gave the same polished answers. Work hard. Trust yourself. Surround yourself with good people. The real answers were messier. Sleepless nights. Therapy twice a week. Panic attacks in bathroom stalls before board meetings. The constant gnawing fear that she wasn't enough, would never be enough no matter how much she achieved. But those weren't answers for Forbes. One last question, the journalist said, tucking her recorder into her bag. Marcus Ashford was released from prison last month. Any comment? Eleanor's smile didn't waver. She had practiced this. Mr. Ashford's situation is between him and the justice system. I wish him well in his future endeavors. The journalist looked disappointed. She had been hoping for drama, bitterness, the kind of raw emotion that made for viral headlines. Eleanor didn't give her the satisfaction. After the journalist left, Eleanor sat alone in her office. Marcus was out. She had known this day was coming, had been preparing for it for months. 3 years wasn't a long sentence, but it was enough to destroy what remained of his reputation, his connections, his sense of self. The Marcus who walked out of that prison wasn't the same man who walked in. She knew, because she had been watching. quietly, carefully, through lawyers and private investigators and the occasional well-placed source. Not out of revenge, those fires had long since burned out. Out of caution. A snake didn't stop being dangerous just because it had been defanged. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. "Can we get pizza for dinner? Please, please, please." Eleanor smiled. Sophie was 6 now, all legs and opinions and bottomless energy. She had her father's eyes that still hurt sometimes, but everything else was pure Eleanor. The stubbornness, the curiosity, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking hard about something. "Pizza it is," Eleanor texted back. "But you have to eat the salad first." She gathered her things and headed for the elevator. The building emptied around her assistants heading home, executives checking their phones, the eternal churn of corporate life. Eleanor nodded at the security guard, stepped into her car, and let the driver take her home. Home was different now. Not the brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. She had bought her own place after the Sterling deal closed. A penthouse on the Upper West Side, with enough room for Sophie to run and enough windows to let in the light. Richard lived 2 floors down, close enough to help, far enough to give them space. Sophie met her at the door already in her pajamas, despite it being only 6 o'clock. "You're early." Sophie threw her arms around Eleanor's waist. "Grandpa said you'd be late because of the important meeting." The important meeting ended early. Eleanor kissed the top of her daughter's head. "Where is Grandpa?" "Kitchen. He's making the salad because he said you'd make me eat vegetables, and he wanted to pick the good ones." Eleanor laughed. Richard had become a different man in the years since that terrible January night. Softer, present. The grandfather he had never been able to be a father. Eleanor wasn't sure she had fully forgiven him for those 23 years of silence. Some wounds didn't heal, they just scarred over. But she had made peace with who he was now. That was enough. Dinner was chaotic and warm, and everything Eleanor had never had in the mansion with Marcus. Sophie talked about school, about her best friend Maya, about the book she was reading. Richard listened with the patient attention of someone who had learned too late that listening was the greatest gift you could give a child. After Sophie went to bed, Eleanor and Richard sat on the balcony watching the city lights flicker. "The Forbes interview went well?" Richard asked. "Same questions, same answers." Eleanor sipped her wine. "They asked about Marcus." Richard's jaw tightened. "What did you say?" "Nothing. That's what made them angry." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Richard spoke again, his voice careful. "He's going to try something. You know that." "I know. Have you thought about what you'll do?" Eleanor looked at the skyline. Somewhere out there, Marcus Ashford was sleeping in a halfway house, wearing borrowed clothes, eating donated food. The man who had once laughed as she walked into a blizzard was now dependent on the charity of strangers. "I've thought about it," she said. "And I've decided I'm done thinking about him." "Eleanor, I mean it, Dad." She turned to face him. 3 years ago, Marcus Ashford was the center of my universe. Everything I did, everything I thought, everything I feared, it all revolved around him. And I'm tired. I'm tired of giving him that power. He could come after you, after Sophie. He could try. Eleanor's voice hardened. But I'm not the woman he threw into the snow anymore. I have resources. I have lawyers. I have a security team that costs more than his entire legal defense. She set down her wine glass. Marcus can spend the rest of his life trying to rebuild what he lost. I'm going to spend mine building something new. Richard studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Your mother would be proud of you, he said quietly. She always knew you were stronger than anyone gave you credit for. Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them away. Tell me about her, she said. Tell me something I don't know. Richard smiled. It was a sad smile weighted with decades of regret. She used to sing in the shower, badly, completely off-key. And she didn't care. She'd belt out show tunes at 6 in the morning while I was trying to read the newspaper, and when I complained, she'd just sing louder. Eleanor laughed. It was a wet laugh, half sob, but it felt good. I didn't know that. There's a lot you didn't know. A lot I should have told you. Richard reached over and took her hand. I wasted so many years, Ellie. So many years being afraid of my own daughter. Why were you afraid? Because you were so much like her. Every time I looked at you, I saw Catherine. Your laugh, your temper, the way you stood up to people even when you were terrified. His voice cracked. When she died, I couldn't bear to look at you anymore. It hurt too much, so I buried myself in work and told myself you were better off without me. I wasn't. I know that now. He squeezed her hand. I know it's too late to be the father you deserved, but I'm trying to be the grandfather Sophie needs. I hope that counts for something. It does, Dad. Eleanor squeezed back. It counts for everything. They sat together until the wine was gone and the city had quieted to a low hum. Then Eleanor went inside, checked on Sophie one more time, and finally let herself sleep. She dreamed of snow. But in the dream, she wasn't walking away from the mansion. She was walking toward something new. The gala was exactly the kind of event Eleanor used to hate. Crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, a room full of people who measured their worth in zeros. But tonight was different. Tonight, Whitmore Technologies was being honored as Innovator of the Year. Tonight, Eleanor would stand on that stage and accept an award that proved once and for all that she had won. Sophie couldn't come too young too late, but Richard was there, resplendent in a tuxedo that probably cost more than Eleanor's first apartment. Margaret was watching Sophie at home, armed with popcorn and a Disney movie marathon. Nervous? Richard asked as they entered the ballroom. Terrified, Eleanor admitted. But I've learned to do things scared. The ceremony was long and self-congratulatory, the way these things always were. Eleanor smiled and nodded and shook hands with people whose names she'd forget by morning. She accepted compliments on her dress, her company, her remarkable journey from nobody to somebody. If only they knew how much it had cost. Finally, her name was called. Eleanor walked to the stage, her heels clicking against the marble floor, her heart pounding in her chest. She took the award, a heavy crystal thing that would probably end up on a shelf somewhere, and turned to face the crowd. Thank you, she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. This award represents the work of hundreds of people, engineers who stayed late, designers who pushed boundaries, investors who believed in us when we were just an idea on paper. She paused, looked out at the sea of faces. But I want to talk about someone who isn't here tonight. Someone who never made it onto the Forbes list or the award circuit. My mother, Catherine Whitmore. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Richard's eyes glistened. My mother died when I was 11. I barely remember her voice. But I remember something she used to say. She used to say that the measure of a person isn't what they have. It's what they do when they have nothing. Eleanor gripped the award tighter. 3 years ago, I had nothing. I was thrown out of my home with my daughter in my arms and the clothes on my back. I was told I was worthless. A placeholder. Nothing. Her voice hardened. But nothing is where everything begins. When you have nothing to lose, you discover what you're willing to fight for. And I was willing to fight for my daughter, for my dignity, for the right to be seen as more than someone else's accessory. She looked directly at the camera that was broadcasting the ceremony live. To every woman watching this who has been told she's not enough, you are enough. You have always been enough. The people who make you feel small are small themselves, and one day you're going to stand where I'm standing, holding proof that you were never nothing. She raised the award. This is for every placeholder who refused to stay in place. Thank you. The applause was thunderous. Eleanor walked off the stage, her legs shaking, her heart racing. Richard met her at the bottom of the steps and pulled her into a fierce hug. Your mother would have given that exact speech, he whispered. Word for word. Eleanor laughed through her tears. I doubt she would have worn heels this uncomfortable. They made their way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and business cards and promises to do lunch soon. Eleanor's face ached from smiling. Her feet ached from standing. All she wanted was to go home and hold her daughter. And then she saw him. Marcus Ashford stood near the back of the ballroom, half hidden behind a pillar. He was thin, prison thin, the kind of weight loss that came from bad food and worse sleep. His suit was cheap, his shoes were scuffed, and his eyes tracked Eleanor across the room with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Richard saw him too. His hand tightened on Eleanor's arm. "Security," he said quietly. "No." Eleanor straightened her spine. "I'll handle this." She walked toward Marcus. The crowd parted around her, sensing the tension, watching with the hungry curiosity of people who smelled drama. Marcus didn't move as she approached. He just stood there, looking at her with those eyes she had once loved. "Hello, Marcus." "Eleanor." His voice was hoarse, rougher than she remembered. "Nice speech." "Thank you." Was that for me the placeholder line? It was for everyone who needed to hear it. She kept her voice neutral. "What are you doing here?" "I was invited." Believe it or not, some people still remember the old Marcus, the one who built a tech empire from nothing. His mouth twisted. The one who didn't need his wife's trust fund to survive. Is that what you tell yourself? It's the truth. Eleanor studied him. The bitterness, the self-pity, the absolute refusal to accept responsibility for anything he had done. Some things never changed. "You built nothing, Marcus. You borrowed my money, stole my code, and took credit for my work. Everything you had was mine. I just let you pretend otherwise." His face reddened. "That's a lie." "It's a documented fact. The court records are public. Anyone can read them." She tilted her head. "Is that why you're here, to rewrite history in front of all these witnesses?" "I'm here because I wanted to see you." His voice dropped. "To tell you something." "What?" Marcus stepped closer. Close enough that she could smell the cheap cologne, the desperation, the failure. "I wanted to tell you that you haven't won. Not really. Because I know who you are, Eleanor. I know the scared little girl hiding behind the fancy title and the big office. And one day everyone else will see her too." Eleanor looked at him. Really looked. And what she saw wasn't a monster anymore. It wasn't even an enemy. It was a small, broken man who had never grown up, who had spent his whole life pretending to be something he wasn't, who had destroyed everything he touched because he was too weak to build anything real. "You're right," she said softly. "I am scared. I'm scared every single day. Scared of failing. Scared of not being enough. Scared of being the placeholder you always told me I was." Marcus's eyes widened. He hadn't expected honesty. "But here's the difference between us, Marcus. I do it anyway. I build anyway. I love anyway. I wake up every morning and I choose to be more than my fear." She stepped back. "You never learned how to do that, and I feel sorry for you. I don't want your pity. It's all I have left to give you." She turned and walked away. "Eleanor." His voice was desperate now. "Eleanor, wait. I still love you. I never stopped. That's what I came to tell you. I made a mistake. I know that now. But we could start over. We could—" She didn't turn around. "Goodbye, Marcus." She kept walking. Through the crowd. Past the cameras. Into the elevator. Down to the car. She didn't cry until she was alone. And then she cried for the girl she used to be. The one who had believed him when he said he loved her. The one who had made herself small so he could feel big. The one who had walked into the snow with nothing but hope that someone would come for her. Someone had come. But it wasn't Marcus. It was herself. Sophie was asleep when Eleanor got home, but she woke her up anyway. "Mommy." Sophie rubbed her eyes. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, baby." Eleanor climbed into bed beside her daughter and pulled her close. "I just wanted to tell you something." "What?" "I love you. More than anything in the whole world. And no matter what happens, no matter who tries to tell you otherwise, you are enough. Exactly as you are." Sophie yawned. "I know, Mommy. You tell me every day." "I know. But tonight I needed to say it again." Sophie snuggled closer. "Did you win your award?" "I did." "Is it shiny?" "Very shiny." "Can I see it tomorrow?" "You can see it right now if you want." Sophie shook her head, already drifting back to sleep. "Tomorrow. I'm tired." Eleanor laughed softly. She pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead and lay there in the darkness, listening to the small, steady breaths of the person she loved most in the world. Outside, the city hummed with its endless energy. Somewhere out there, Marcus Ashford was walking back to his halfway house, nursing his wounded pride, telling himself lies about what he had lost and why. Eleanor didn't care anymore. She had spent 12 years caring about Marcus Ashford. 12 years trying to please him, 12 years being diminished by him, 12 years believing his version of who she was. That was enough. She was Eleanor Catherine Whitmore, daughter of Richard and Catherine, mother of Sophie, CEO of a company she built from the ashes of betrayal. She was a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had walked through fire and emerged holding her own heart in her hands. She was enough. She had always been enough. And now, finally, she knew it. The next morning, Sophie ate her cereal while Eleanor drank her coffee and Richard read the newspaper. A perfectly ordinary morning. The kind of morning Eleanor had dreamed about during all those cold nights in the mansion when ordinary felt impossible. "Mommy!" Sophie looked up from her bowl. "What does placeholder mean?" Eleanor froze. "Where did you hear that word?" "Grandpa was reading the article about your speech. It said you called yourself a placeholder." Eleanor glanced at Richard, who looked guilty. "It means—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "It means someone who takes up space until someone better comes along. Someone who isn't important enough to stay." Sophie's forehead wrinkled. "That's stupid." "Why?" "Because you're the most important person in the whole world." Sophie said it like it was obvious, like it was a fact everyone should know. "You're my mom." Eleanor felt tears threaten again. She blinked them back. "You're right, baby. It is stupid." "Then why did you say it?" "Because sometimes we believe stupid things about ourselves, and sometimes we need to say them out loud so we can realize how stupid they are." Sophie nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. Then she went back to her cereal. Richard met Eleanor's eyes over the newspaper. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She had won. Not just the court case, not just the company, not just the award. She had won herself back. And that was the only victory that had ever mattered. Outside, the January sun broke through the clouds, flooding the kitchen with light. A new day, a new year, a new life built not on the ashes of the old, but on the foundation of everything she had always been. Eleanor Whitmore finished her coffee, kissed her daughter, hugged her father, and walked out into the morning. She had work to do. She had a life to live, and she had never felt more ready.